I want to ask you something before we start. Think back to your childhood. Think about the moment when you were in trouble, when you did something wrong, or something an adult decided was wrong, and there were consequences. Maybe you got spanked. Maybe you got grounded. Maybe someone took something away from you. Maybe you were sent to your room. Maybe there was yelling. Maybe there was silence. The cold, withholding kind that somehow felt worse than yelling. Now, I want you to notice something. How did you feel in that moment? Not what you did next, not whether you behaved better afterward, but how did you feel in your body, in your chest, in that moment when the consequence came? I'll tell you what most people tell me when I ask them that question: scared, ashamed, small, alone, like I had to hide, like I had to be different, like I wasn't enough. Not, wow, I really understand now why that was wrong and I'm motivated to do better. Just fear, just shame, just the desire to not be seen that way again. And here's the question that I want you to sit with today. If that's what it felt like, what did it actually teach us? And what are we teaching our children when we parent the same way? Welcome back to Not Broken. I am your host, Dr. Tiffany Roberts. Last episode, we talked about how your child is not the problem and what that shift in perspective actually opens up. If you haven't seen that episode, I encourage you to start there because today builds on it. Today, we're going somewhere that might be a little uncomfortable. We're going to talk about discipline. Specifically, we're going to talk about fear-based discipline. What is it? Where it comes from, why it's so common, and what it actually costs us and our children. I want to say up front that this episode is not designed to make you feel guilty. If you hear something today that lands hard, that's not condemnation. That's recognition. And recognition is where change begins. Let's go. So the word discipline comes from the Latin word disciplina, which means teaching, learning. It shares a root with the word discipline. A discipline is something that you practice. Someone who disciplines is at the root of the word a teacher. So discipline, in its truest sense, means that I am teaching this child something. And it raises the most important question that we could ask about parenting approach. What is actually teaching? Not what are we intending to teach, not what we say we're teaching. What is the child actually learning in their body, in their nervous system, in the understanding of themselves and the world? Because those two things, what we intend and what is received, are often not the same. Most of us were raised inside a particular model of discipline. It looks something like this. A child misbehaves. Adult identifies misbehavior. Adult applies consequence, punishment, withdrawal of any kind of privilege, physical correction, isolation, shaming. Child experiences discomfort. Child adjusts behavior to avoid the discomfort in the future. That's the model. Behavior in, consequence out. Compliance achieved. And on the surface, it seems to work. The child stops doing the thing. The parent feels like they've done their job and order is restored. But let's look underneath that. Let's ask the real question. Why did the child stop? Because they understood that what they did was wrong and genuinely wanted to do better? Or because they were afraid of what would happen if they did it again? Those are not the same thing. And the difference between them shapes everything about who that child becomes later on. A child who stops because they're afraid has learned that the world is managed by power and threat. To stay safe, I must manage the perception of the people who have the power over me. A child who stops because they genuinely understand has learned my actions affect others and myself, and I want to make choices I feel good about. One produces compliance, the other produces conscious. And compliance, as helpful as it is in short term, is not the same thing as character. So, we have a cultural obsession with obedient children. An obedient child is praised. Their parent is praised. What a well-behaved child. It reads as success, as proof that the parenting is working. But I want to ask you a hard question. What does obedience require of a child? It requires them to suppress their own impulse in favor of an external authority's preference, to override what they feel, what they want, what they think, and substitute what the adult in power wants instead. When obedience is trained through fear, through the consistent experience of if I don't do what they want, something bad will happen. Something gets shaped in that child. They learn to read the room instead of trusting themselves. They learn to manage other people's emotions instead of expressing their own. They learn that their inner world is less important than the outer performance. And then they grow up. And authority figures change. It's not the parent anymore. It's bosses. It's partners. It's social pressure. It's government. It's their own inner critic. And they're still doing the same thing. Managing, performing, suppressing, trying to not disappoint someone. And we call that anxiety. We call it people pleasing. We call it low self-worth. We call it difficulty with boundaries. But it started here, in the training of obedience through fear. I want to be careful here because I know someone is already thinking, but there has to be rules. There have to be expectations. You can't just let the children do whatever they want. And you're absolutely right. I'm not arguing about permissiveness. I'm arguing for something much more demanding than permissiveness, actually. I'm arguing for teaching instead of threatening, for connection instead of control, for genuine influence instead of forced compliance. That's harder. It requires more of us. But it produces children who actually know why they do what they do, not just what they're allowed to get away with. Here's the thing I always want to say to parents when we get into this territory. Fear-based parenting didn't come from nowhere. You didn't wake up one day and decide, I think I'll manage my child through fear and shame. Nobody does this consciously. It feels like love. It feels like responsibility. It feels like the right thing to do because it's what was done for you. And it was probably done to the people who raised you by the people who raised them. We're looking at something that goes back generations, a way of raising children that was a standard practice, that was endorsed by culture and religion and community, that was considered not just acceptable, but virtuous. Spare the rod and spoil the child. That phrase has been shaping parenting philosophy for centuries. And I want to be gentle with this because I know many people watching this have deep religious roots. And I want to honor that. We'll spend a whole episode on faith and parenting and religious deconstruction. But for today, I'll just say the idea that a child must be made to suffer in order to learn, that fear is a necessary tool in shaping a good person. That idea has a history. And when we look at that history honestly, and when we look at what the research shows about how human beings actually develop, we find that the idea doesn't hold up. Not because the people who taught us were evil, but because they didn't have the information that we have now. And we do. And so we're responsible for what we do with it moving forward. Let me get a little nerdy for a moment because I think this matters. When a child experiences fear, when the threat response is activated, what happens to the brain? The amygdala, the brain's alarm center, fires. Stress hormones flood the system. The body prepares for fight, flight, or freeze. And here's the critical part. When this is happening, the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for reasoning, learning, and empathy, decision-making, that goes offline. You cannot think clearly when you are afraid. That is not a character flaw, it's actually biology. So when we use fear as a teaching tool, when a child is in the state of fear, they are biologically guaranteeing that genuine learning cannot happen in that moment. What the child is learning is not the lesson we think we're teaching. They are learning to survive the moment. They're learning to read our face, our body language, the danger signals. They are in pure survival mode. And here's what chronic exposure to fear-based parenting does over time. It keeps the alarm system hyperactivated. The amygdala stays on high alert. The child becomes hypervigilant, always watching, always reading, always prepared for threat, always in a low level in activation. We see this and we say the child is anxious, the child is reactive, the child has emotional regulation issues. And we're not wrong, they do actually, but we're missing the cause. The alarm keeps going off because it was trained to keep going off. Now, fear-based parenting doesn't always look the same. I want to walk you through 3 versions of it because I want you to be able to recognize it in your own upbringing and possibly in yourself. The first phase is obvious. We have aggression. This is the version most people think when they think bad parenting. You've got the yelling, the physical punishment, the threats. Do it or else. This is a fear-based parenting in its most visible form. The child complies because the threat is explicit. Then you have a second phase. It's more subtle and it's withdrawal. This is the parent who goes cold, silent, who withholds affection or approval when a child misbehaves, who gives the child the message, not in words, but in energy. I am less pleased with you right now. You are disappointing me. My love is conditional on your behavior. This is often not recognized as fear-based. It looks controlled. It looks calm. But to a child whose primary need is attachment, whose nervous system is wired to need approval and connection to their caregiver, withdrawal of connection is one of the most powerful threats imaginable. The child complies not because of physical fear, but because of the terror of losing belonging. The third phase is the most invisible, shame. Shame-based parenting doesn't necessarily involve yelling or withdrawal. It works through language, through implication. What's wrong with you? You should be ashamed of yourself after everything I've done for you. I don't know what to do with you. Why can't you be more like your sister? These phrases don't have to be dramatic or frequent to do damage because shame doesn't just say you did something wrong. Shame says you are wrong. You are defective. You are not enough. And a child who absorbs shame as their core identity, who grows up believing at the deepest level that something is wrong with them, the child will spend decades trying to manage, compensate, perform, hide, or numb that feeling. Does any of this sound familiar? Not as something that you're doing, but as something that has been done to you, because that's usually where we need to start. I want to spend some time here on outcomes because I think one of the reasons fear-based parenting persists is that the costs are delayed. The damage doesn't show up on a Tuesday afternoon. It shows up 10, 20, 30 years later in an adult who doesn't understand why they feel the way they feel. So let me walk you through what I see in my work, the long-term fruits of fear-based discipline. The child who was very obedient, very well behaved, very good, never caused problems, often becomes an adult who cannot say no without feeling crushing guilt, who overcommits and underdelivers because they can't disappoint anyone, who stays in relationships and jobs and situations that aren't good for them because leaving feels like failure, like abandonment, like being bad, who has no idea what they actually want because they spent so long wanting what they were supposed to want that they lost connection and contact with their own desires, who is exhausted, chronically bone deep exhausted because performing goodness for decades while suppressing their authentic self is one of the most draining things a human being can do. And this person often has a very hard time in therapy, in healing work, and in personal growth because they've been so thoroughly trained to give the right answers that they don't know how to actually access what is true for them. That is not a problem that started in adulthood. It started in childhood in a home where compliance was the price of belonging. Then there's the child who pushed back, who couldn't or wouldn't comply, who was labeled the difficult one, the bad one, the problem child. This child was probably punished more, shamed more, controlled more, and the rebellion grew because rebellion is often the only way a self can survive when it's being squeezed out of existence. This child often becomes an adult who has complicated relationships with authority, who either swings into submission, finding their compliant child eventually, or into continued defiance, which costs them, in their careers and their relationships, who often carries enormous shame about who they are, regardless of how they present now, who may have internalized the bad kid story so deeply that it still runs their decisions decades later, who often, in my experience, is the most perceptive person in the room, the one who could see clearly that something was wrong, even when they didn't have the language for it, the one whose rebellion was underneath everything, a bid for authentic existence. And then there's the child who disappeared, who learned that neither compliance nor rebellion was safe. So they went somewhere else entirely, internal, invisible. This child often becomes an adult who struggles deeply with knowing what they feel. Alexithymia is the clinical term, difficulty identifying and describing emotions because the emotional system has shut down so early, so thoroughly, that it genuinely doesn't send clear signals anymore. Who may have chronic physical symptoms such as headaches, digestive issues, fatigue, pain that have no clear explanation because the body keeps the score, as the research tells us. What couldn't be felt emotionally got stored physically. Who often describes a sense of going through life behind glass, present, but not quite connected, there, but not really there. And who, when they finally do start to heal, often go through a period of grief so profound that it surprises them. Grief for the child they were, who needed so much more than they got. I share these not to be bleak. I share them because every one of these adults, the compliant one, the rebellious one, the disappeared one, can heal, is healing. The work is possible at any age. But I want us to feel the weight of this because when we understand what's at stake, not just in the terms of our child's behavior this week, but in terms of who they're becoming, it changes what we're willing to do differently. Before I move on, I want to say something important. If you were raised this way, if fear, shame, and control were the tools used on you, it is very likely that people who raised you loved you. It is very likely that they were doing what they believed was right. what they have been taught, what their faith, community, and culture endorsed. Intention matters. It matters enormously in terms of how we hold people morally. But intention does not change impact. A child's nervous system does not know that the punishment was given with love. It knows fear. It knows threat. It responds accordingly. And when we understand that, when we hold both things at once, they meant well and it still caused harm, we can grieve it without needing someone to be a villain. We can honor our own path without making our parents into monsters. And we can decide, I understand how this happened. I understand why. And I'm going to do something different. This is not betrayal of who we came from. That is the work of healing. Okay, I've been challenging something that many of you have held for a very long time. And I want to make sure that I'm not leaving you with just the demolition and none of the construction. So let's talk about what it looks like to discipline, to teach without fear. Because this is what I think a lot of parenting content goes wrong. It says, stop doing this, and it doesn't give you anything concrete to do instead. And then parents feel lost. And in the absence of something better, they go back to what they know. So let me give you a framework, not a rigid system, a way of thinking. So here is the single most important principle that I can give you. Connection before correction. Before you address the behavior, before the consequence, the teaching moment, there must be connection. Why? Because a child who does not feel connected to you is not accessible to you. Their nervous system is in defense mode. The walls are up, and you can talk all you want to a wall. Connection doesn't mean that you approve the behavior. It means that you're still in relationship with the child who did it. It sounds like, I can see you're really upset right now. I'm here. It sounds like, I know this is hard. We're going to figure it out together. It sounds like presence without judgment, warmth without permissiveness. And then one connection is established. And then once connection is established, once the nervous system has settled, once the child feels safe with you, then the teaching can happen. Then the conversation about what happened, what hurt whom, what needs to be repaired, what they might do differently, that conversation lands. That conversation becomes possible. Connection is not the alternative to discipline. It's the prerequisite to it. Let me make an important distinction that I think changes how parents think about consequences. There's a difference between a natural consequence and a punitive consequence. A natural consequence is one that flows directly from behavior. Your child leaves their bike out in the rain and it rusts. That's a natural consequence. The world taught the lesson. You didn't have to. These are powerful teachers because the connection between action and outcome is direct, and the authority is not the parent, it's reality. And reality is a patient, consistent teacher. A punitive consequence is one that the parent imposes that doesn't naturally flow from the behavior, but is designed to cause enough discomfort that the child avoids the behavior in the future. Now, sometimes logical consequences aren't purely natural or are appropriate. Sometimes structure and boundaries are necessary, and the world won't provide consequences directly. That's okay. But here's the test I'd offer. Is this consequence designed to teach or to hurt? Is it proportionate, relational to the behavior, and something that the child can understand and learn from? Or is it a primarily about my frustration, my need to feel in control, my desire for the child to suffer enough that they won't do it again? Honest answers to those questions can tell you a lot about where we're operating from. Here's something that I believe is completely transformative in family relationships, and almost nobody talks about it in parenting content. Repair. After conflict, after you've lost your temper, after you said something that you regret, after a discipline moment that didn't go the way that you wanted, repair is the conversation that follows. It's you going back to the child and saying, I want to talk about what happened earlier. I don't think I handled that well. I was frustrated and I said or did something that wasn't okay. And I'm sorry. That's not how I want to talk to you. I cannot tell you how powerful this is. Not because it erases what happens, it doesn't, but because it teaches your child something that fear based discipline never could, that relationships survive mistakes, that repair is possible, that the adults in their life are human and they can own that, that love doesn't evaporate when things go wrong. Children who grow up in homes where repair is practiced, where rupture is followed by reconnection, develop what researchers call secure attachment. Now, obviously, we don't want to continue blowing up all the time and then trying to repair it. But once in a while, we're human. We're going to make mistakes. And they learn that relationships are resilient, that conflict doesn't mean abandonment. And they learn how to repair too, because they've seen it modeled. Most of us were never given a repair. Most of us watch the adults around us move past conflicts through silence or pretending that it didn't even happen or explaining it anyway. We never saw someone come back and say, I was wrong and I'm sorry. So this might feel uncomfortable, unfamiliar, maybe even dangerous, like it will undermine your authority. It won't. Actually, it does the opposite. A parent who can admit that they were wrong and repair is a parent a child respects deeply, because they're showing them that your relationship with them matters more than you being right. That's not weakness. That's the most powerful thing that you can model. The ultimate goal of discipline, of teaching, is not a child who follows the rules. It's a child who has internalized values, who does the right thing, not because someone is watching and consequences are actually coming, but because they understand why it matters, because they have empathy, because they have integrity. You cannot instill values through fear. You can instill compliance through fear, but compliance is dependent on the presence of the authority. When the authority is gone, when they go to college, when they're with their peers, when no one is watching, the compliance has no foundation. Values, on the other hand, are internal. They go with the child everywhere they go. And values are transmitted through relationship, through conversations about why things matter, through watching the adults in their life live through those values, through being allowed to make mistakes and learning from them without being shamed, through having a self that is respected and known so they know what they stand for. This is a longer game. It doesn't produce quick results, but it produces humans. And that's the actual job. I want to close today by going somewhere that I think is the real root of all of this. We've been talking about fear-based parenting, but I want to name the fear that's underneath it. Not the fear of the misbehaving child, the fear inside the parent. Because I think that is what drives most of this, the control, the punishment, the need for compliance. It's not primarily about the child. It's about what the parent is afraid of. Let me be honest about some of those fears. Tell me if any of these land. The fear that if you don't control your child now, they'll grow up to be someone terrible and it will be all your fault. The fear that other people are watching and judging your parenting, that a misbehaving child in public reflects directly on your worth as a parent and a person. The fear that you're already failing, that you've already done too much damage, that it's too late. The fear that your child's emotions are too big, that if you let them feel fully, something will break. Maybe them, maybe you. That fear that if you're not the authority, if you're not in control, everything will fall apart. These fears are real. They're not irrational. They come from somewhere. And here's what I know about fear. When we can't face it, it makes our decisions for us. When I'm afraid of my child's behavior, afraid of what it means, afraid of what other people think, afraid of losing control, I parent from that fear. And fear contracts, it grasps, it controls, it punishes. But when I can be honest about my fear, when I can name it, feel it, understand where it came from, I get some space from it. It stops running the show automatically. And from that space, I can make a different choice. I want to say something that I believe is the most important thing in this show. The most powerful thing that you can do for your child is to heal yourself. Not fix yourself. You're not broken. Not perfect yourself. Heal. Do the work of understanding where the fear came from, where your patterns came from, what you absorbed in your own childhood that still runs your reactions as a parent. Maybe this means therapy. Maybe this means community, a group of people doing this work alongside of you. Maybe that means honest conversations with a partner or a trusted friend. Maybe it means sitting with this content, letting it stir in you, and letting what stirs become a door. Because every degree of healing that you do, every layer of fear that you can name and understand and work through, that healing shows up in your home. And how you respond to the hard moments and the safety that your child experiences in the model you're becoming. You don't have to be a finished product. Your child doesn't need a perfect parent. They just need a real one, a human one who is in the process, one who fails and repairs, one who keeps showing up and keeps growing. That parent, that imperfect, healing, trying parent, is the greatest gift that you can give. If today's conversation brought up something for you, if you found yourself thinking about your own childhood or your own experience of discipline, your own fears as a parent, I want you to sit with that. Don't rush past it. Don't explain it away. Just notice, because noticing is the beginning. Here's one thing for this week. The next time that you feel the impulse to control, to punish, to correct your child out of urgency, pause. Just take a moment and ask yourself, what am I afraid of right now? Not what your child did. What are you afraid of? You don't have to have the answer. You don't have to do anything differently in that moment. Just notice the fear underneath the impulse. That noticing, that small act of self-awareness is where everything begins to change. If this episode stirred something in you, if you're starting to see your own story differently or your child's story differently, I want you to know there's a place to go deeper. I've created resources, a community, courses, ways to work with us directly for exactly this journey. The links are in the description and come find us. And if this episode helped you, please share it. There is a parent in your life who needs this conversation. Someone who is white-knuckling their way through parenthood without a map. Send it to them. It might change their week. It might change their family. So I want to leave you with this. The fact that you were parented through fear does not make you a fearful parent by destiny. Patterns can be interrupted. Cycles can end. New ways of being are possible. Not because you're extraordinary, but because you're willing. That willingness, it's enough to begin. Your child is not broken, and neither are you. See you in the next episode. Next time on Not Broken, we're going to talk about something that almost nobody names. The way your childhood is still in the room with you every time you parent. We'll call it what it is, conditioning. And we're going to start figuring out how to see it so it stops seeing for you.